Hey there, welcome to the Dentalligentsia Podcast, where we interview premium dental vendors. Today, we have a special guest, Desra Simpson from AI Healthcare Marketing, and we have something really neat to speak with you about naming, how to properly name your practice. And welcome, Desra. How are you?
Hi, Nick. I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Really excited to talk about this because this is like one of this is really the front line of how you promote your business is really through your name. Talk to us about why naming matters.
It definitely is the foundation of a practice, like we were kind of talking about a little bit earlier. Helps establish the entire name. It establishes who you are, who the practice is. Talking about it a little bit, there's a lot of do's and don'ts, and I know we're going to get into that a little bit later, but it is the foundation of what you're going to be building your practice on.
So how does a good practice name impact patient perception and also help with marketing success?
You have to think about your demographic for sure. So always pulling that demographic and finding out what the kind of demographic is of your area. The personality is really interesting. So a lot of times you can pull mosaic reports and kind of see what that their interests are and who they are because maybe they are families, maybe they are boomers, maybe they are the older demographic that you want to hit. So you have to figure out what your niche is as well as what the demographic is in the neighborhood. So making sure that the name is connected to you as well as the community is really important to make sure that you can target who they are. Hope that answered that.
Yeah, how could a poorly chosen name hold a practice back? What are some of the
A
common
lot of times, yeah, it's a good question because what happens is spelling. And I'll have to say that's probably a number one thing. You choose a name that is hard to say, hard to spell, misunderstood. It's really important to pick something that is easy to pronounce, easy to spell. There are ways that you can change the variation of that, but making sure that it's easy to connect, easy to read. Another important thing is, and I know everybody loves to do this, but don't name your practice after yourself. That definitely causes issues when you're ready to sell, when you're ready to expand. Naming the practice after yourself is harder than you realize in your future goals.
Talk to us a little bit more about the do's then in naming a practice. What are, starting from the beginning, what are some of the best practices when you're thinking about naming a healthcare practice?
We're kind of touching on demographics, making sure that you're connecting to your audience. Let's make sure that it's clean, it's simple, memorable. Let's also check availability, making sure that you're looking to making sure that that name hasn't been taken because a lot of times there might be a name that's too similar to that in the area. So we want to make sure that that helps with the search engine optimization. People aren't accidentally clicking on the other site when typing in your name. We also want to make sure that there's domain name availability. That's always a really important situation. Same thing with social media. You want to make sure that that tag name is available as well. There's a lot of do's, and just making sure that you love it is important because that is your name. That is, like we were saying earlier, your foundation of your practice. Loving this name is going to be the most important part of this.
So you had mentioned using those demographics of your target audience to kind of,
Mhm.
as a tool to kind of, think about and brainstorm about that name for your future branding. But what types of, if you're aiming at families or younger families versus seniors, what are the types of things that you coach your clients on how to reach those specific demographics?
Yes. So, again, making sure for that older demographic, if you're really pushing implants and you're really pushing that, you know, later care, maybe you want to make sure that you include implants or dentures inside of your name. Or if you are a pediatric office, making sure that pediatric dentistry is inside your tagline or inside your name as well. Again, we want to make sure that it is simple enough for people to find when they're searching online. So making sure it's easy to find, easy to navigate, easy to spell. It it just really does align with that demographic like you were talking about. So we would really enforce looking over those reports, making sure you understand what your niche is as well. Because a lot of times we'll have practices come to us and they just don't know. They say, oh, we'll take anybody. Everybody can take everybody. However, let's make sure that you stand apart than everyone else.
So let's say I'm working with you as a new dentist, and I have brainstormed half a dozen ideas. What's your process? How do you help me, filter through, or how do you kind of you know try to, once we kind of have a short list, how do you get down to the nitty gritty and pick the right one?
Yeah, we'll definitely have a discovery kind of nice to meet you, first date interviews, like we kind of call it. Talking to them again, what their vision is for the future. Are they planning to expand? Are you wanting to, really grow this practice into multiple areas? Do you want to stick with pediatric, or do you want to grow into the generational kind of dentistry? So it really depends on what they are looking for. So we will read over those names with you, kind of say them out loud, because a lot of times saying them out loud, just like you're naming your child, scream it down the hallway. Let's see if it kind of flows. So we make sure to kind of communicate that with you to make sure that you are in love with this. Like we were kind of saying, we do our due diligence to make sure that the URL isn't taken. We also make sure that the client does their due diligence to make sure they're talking to their attorney, making sure that that name is not already trademarked. So there's a lot of great tools online that you can navigate to make sure that that name is not already taken. We always suggest GoDaddy, going on to their search engine to see what kind of names for URLs are available. And that does help narrow things down a little bit, making sure that that URL is free and that social media tag is available as well. So it's definitely a conversation that we need to have with the client to make sure that they are on board with it, and making sure, do you have your colors picked out already? Do you have, what is the vibe of your practice? And that's really important for us to kind of understand to help, navigate the journey of naming the practice.
You talked a little bit about running a trademark search, and
Mhm, mhm,
I'm wondering, like, I guess I'm sure if one was hoping to, imprint, the DSO model and kind of go all over the place, there's probably those practitioners probably, are really mindful about that. But for the independent dentist who's, mostly focusing in on a community, or even if they want to have multiple locations, they're probably within, within a, I don't know, a half an hour of each of their
mhm.
locations. Is it still really important, do you think, to do that trademark search and actually go through the process of trademarking your own logo and name?
Yes, I do, only because we have found so many times that somebody from New York and then someone from Texas, they have very similar names, and we've had to go through the process of actually renaming a practice, redoing their logo, redoing their website, changing all of their copy, because they did not go through the process properly in the very beginning. So they came to us already with a name, they already came to us with their logo, and, we did our due diligence. We did give a red flag. Unfortunately, they did not listen. So 6 months down the road, they did get a cease and desist. You have to change your name. So we had to go through the process of changing their name, updating everything. And they were in a small suburb and it was a small town. But a lot of times people are just out there trying to find, sorry, we're coming after you. So it's always just good to have that awareness available, and making sure that you're protected.
Talk to me about common names or generic names, and what the dangers are by, I guess, mailing it in and not really doing an in-depth study to try to figure out how you should be, what your name should be and how you should brand yourself.
So some generic, just smile, dental, just that very like common search. A lot of times, and it does get a little bit tricky. Again, this is where that discovery first date interview comes into play. Are you planning to expand? Because we want to maybe name your practice after a landmark in the area. Out here in Scottsdale, we have Old Town Scottsdale, and people call it Old Town. So again, would you want to name your practice around just Old Town? Now, are you planning on staying there? So again, it depends on that first date kind of discovery meeting, talking more about don'ts of names, again, naming it after yourself, really pushing for just the super generic names along the lines of cities, and that's where it gets kinda dull, and I know it's oh, go ahead.
Yeah, what about, like, modern or trendy type of names? Are there anything to
There's a lot of pushback for that. I would say, yes, I would love to name your practice something unique that's with the times. However, moving that forward, it does lose that brand appeal. So it's hard to, again, push that name out there to the public and push that name out there with even search engine optimization keywording. So it does become diluted and it becomes generic, and it could even turn into a negative having that name because you don't know what the future holds in some ways. There's really a fine line between generic and too trendy. So we try to help push that middle ground.
classic and timeless?
Yes, yes.
What kind of advice would you give to someone who's kind of behind the 8 ball and they haven't put enough thought into this? They haven't given enough, time to, and they're gonna open a practice, in a couple months, and they're kind of under the gun. Do you have any advice for anybody like that who has to make these types of decisions pretty quickly?
I would hope that in the future and when you're talking to your peers, tell them to plan earlier. So that's number one, just educating everybody that naming the practice is not something that can happen overnight. It does take a lot of thought into it. And if you are under the gun and an immediate need to, talk to someone, you can give us a call, maybe talk to, your peer group. However, I would say let's also really push looking on GoDaddy, trying to find out if the domain name is taken, and I guess talking to a marketer. I think that's going to be one of the number ones because, like I was kind of saying and repeating it, that discovery meeting to us is so important because we get to know who you are and we get to make sure that, this name is exactly what you want it to be. Sometimes it's hard to figure that out. You don't want to talk about yourself, but my team is really good about pulling that data out of you and talking to you and letting you talk about yourself. So I think that is important to, just really try your hardest to talk to somebody before you're really underneath that gun and having to push that name out there immediately.
So you do that brainstorming session. You check to see if the URL is actually available.
Mhm.
Do a trademark search, and it is available. Go through the pick the finalize that as a name, and then likely go through the trademarking yourself so that nobody else can use the exact
Mhm.
same name as you. Are there any other state level regulations that you've come across doing this all over the country, or are there any other rules and regulatory concerns that somebody should be worried about?
That's a good question, and there definitely can be. I would always say take a look at your state board, see if there's anything that you need to actually have dental in your name. Maybe there are some rules. I know that we did also have a practice in New York that they got their hand slapped because they had a name that it wasn't approved. And again, it's state by state. So you really need to find out what exactly your state is needing. And I think it is important to navigate that even with your attorney, talk with them, maybe have a lunch date, talk about some names, figure that process out a little bit because they know how to process that as well and help you and guide you into the correct direction.
we're thinking about, let's say we really are close on that concept and we're thinking about digital presence and branding. Are there any specific things that you should be aware of when you're looking at different social media handles, or you want them to be consistent? So you are like, for example, for me, it's at Mirlo Rep and make that consistent along
Mhm.
Facebook, Twitter, or excuse me, X, and Instagram, and all of all the other social media, so that you're essentially you search one keyword and you're available like that everywhere. Are there other, am I wrong, or is there are there
Nope,
other?
that's correct. No, that's correct. Now, if we're finding that we want to be very state specific, maybe we will encourage you to put a Z after them. Maybe we need to push some type of different way to, change the URL a little bit. If you are very adamant on a name, we can help find different ways to make sure that your URL is available or that handle is available. I would also say, just really pushing and finding out. Sorry, Nick, I just kind of blanked out there.
Oh, well, no worries. I mean, it is. I mean, like, let's say we're working together, and I have a name that I love, but I found
Yeah.
out that it's taken, or at least, I'm able to do it, but the social media handles are taken. What do we how do we handle that?
So that's where we would go into the process of saying, do we really need this name and do we really want this name? So I would say we could, again, navigate that trademark, find out if it's taken, and then we can also change variations and ways, adding in that state in there, maybe adding in the city name inside of there as well, into that handle, into that URL.
How do we, when we're kind of contemplating this whole thing in a big picture, and we are looking even at our competitors, does that help inform our decision making in picking a name, or how,
Yes,
or
that's a good question for sure. Making sure that you're pulling that, again, jumping back to those demographic reports, competitor reports, pulling that information to find out what the names are and how they are holding that niche and what is different from you to them. So we want to make sure that, you're standing out from them. We're making sure that you are not comparing yourself to them. We want to make sure that you're standing out and you're shining differently than this practice down the road or other practices.
Yeah, it's really interesting. A lot of times, I'll be working with an early career dentist, and we're looking for an opportunity space, whether it's a purchase or a lease, and they're like, "Oh my God, there's a lot of dentists in this area."
Mhm.
When you really dig into the demographics, it's like, how many of these dentists are really your true competitors? Because if these guys are at a different career stage, or they likely, a latter career dentist likely is not very sophisticated, not, doesn't have a marketing campaign at all,
Modern.
likely has a very rudimentary website. And so, this is, your website, your name, your brand. This is likely the first thing that your patients are going to see that attract you, to your practice. And so it's really important to
Yes.
take some time. How long does the process typically take when you're doing these first date, from first dates to envisioning to we got it? How long does it typically take you?
It could take 2 weeks, maybe about that, because we do like to make sure that we have that first date, we have the discovery, we're navigating, doing our due diligence, making sure, the names are not taken. So it could be about 2 weeks. Again, we have had people come back to us and say, we just love this name. This is exactly what we're going to go with. So big things, again, just making sure that the URL is available. And there are some mixed reviews about URLs here and there. Google has kind of changed its algorithms a little bit, so the URLs are not as important to have key phrases inside of them, which is really interesting. So they are kind of changing their views on that a little bit. So don't 100% put all of your names, whether or not the URL is available, because that's not always the biggest thing anymore, because there's so much content that is important on the website now. Videos, the blogs, any type of additional content on there is now more important than the URL.
I read the article that you had put out on your blog post, and I think it references naming gaps. Does that, when you were looking inside of a local market, how does identifying naming gaps help a new practice stand out?
Making sure that your name is different and that there is that gap between you and another practice is going to be important. Again, just making sure that the niche is there, your name is there, and that presence is available through the domain name, through the content on the website. So the gap doesn't necessarily need to be there, and it's not always 100% something that we're looking into. We want to make sure that this is around you and not about the other people.
So you have a name that you love. How does that name influence the rest of the branding? The decor in their office, the
Mhm.
logo, the color scheme. How do you guys use that to kind of inform your decision making?
So we have some really cute names out there, and they are based around the community. Maybe some are around the bridges that are in the area, and maybe it's a certain color. So we want to make sure that, it's really pushing the decor inside as well. So maybe everything is branded inside about this bridge. Maybe everything is branded inside about this color and the vibe of that neighborhood. Having a person that lives in the community and connecting themselves with maybe that community, that bridge, that landmark, and then going into your practice and seeing how everything is connected, seeing the cohesiveness, making sure that, that logo, that bridge is in the website, on the branding, in the name, in the office. It really helps stand out and helps the name actually come to life a lot more because they're understanding the connection and the connection to the community, which is going to be important again, is because that's going to be your niche, and that's the difference between you and some of these older practices that again just have their name around their name.
You guys do a great job, on the demographic side, on the certainly on the marketing side, but the understanding, I mean, I know you've gone through this process with hundreds and hundreds of independent dentists. Share us some of your wins, some awesome examples about how you guys really kind of helped somebody kind of create, we'll just focus on the actual naming piece, but how it brought everything together, and it was like it turned into a really awesome situation where they
Unique,
were.
yeah. We had this office, in California, and they couldn't really they were taking over this practice, and the doctor would always come in with boots and spurs, and he was very cowboy kind of vibe. So, they were taking over this practice, but they wanted to continue that, life and that vibe of that. So they live in a very hilly area. And so they went with what is called rolling hills. So what we did with the brand is that we actually turned it into a stamp, and like a brand, like a cattle brand. So it really brought out the vibe of the prior doctor that was there to make sure that the office stayed with its roots. So, they really made sure that, and we made it still classy, that you could see the hills in the background on the branding. And then it had Rolling Hills Dental as the actual emblem. So, it was a really fun conversation to have with them and hearing about the prior doctor and understanding what they wanted to continue to be a part of the community with.
That's a really cool,
Yeah.
creative way to kind of, bridge the gap between the transitioning doctor and the new doctor, and I'm sure it resonated
Hmm.
with their community and with
With the
their
community.
patients.
Hmm.
So that's
Yeah.
really cool. Um, talk to me. I had to go back into scary things, but what are some red flags that tell you a practice name won't age well? Do you have any thoughts?
Trying to think of a couple of examples or thoughts. Definitely, and I keep throwing this out there, but naming the practice after yourself is one of our biggest red flags. If we do see that in there, we will talk to you till we're blue in the face to have you rename that practice. Even if you are transitioning, so we get it a lot. A lot of people are coming to us and they're transitioning into a practice that's been named around the doctor. So we have to then go through the process of renaming this practice when you could have had the brand already established for them. The selling process is so much easier to have that name around something that's unique. Of course, you are unique, but having that name as you is not always the best idea. We really just try to strive and push to make sure that you're not having very long names. You're not having things that could be misunderstood in the future. Again, like we kind of talked about those trendy names, things that could in the future, you just don't know. Again, that little black dress, the classic kind of thing, you want to make sure that that is your name as well. We want to make sure that you will have this forever and it's not going to cause an issue in the future.
Any more awesome success stories you want to call out?
Really, Rolling Hills was probably my favorite, and I got to work with it personally on that one. So that one was probably my favorite. I can't think of anything at the moment right now. I should have pulled a little bit more thought behind those.
No, that's totally cool. Anything that I haven't asked that I should ask about naming?
No, just the naming process isn't always about creativity. It sometimes needs to be a strategy behind it. So, being too unique can be an issue, but being too generic is also an issue. So, again, it is that fine line between making sure that it is an interesting name, it has meaning behind it, but it also is not so unique that people cannot find it. So just making sure that you can grow with it long term, just making sure that you have the legal protection behind it. There are a lot of steps behind it instead of just throwing a name out there and hoping that it's available and hoping that it can be yours. So definitely do your due diligence ahead of time before just jumping into a name.
Awesome. Well, Desra, I really appreciate your time. This is really awesome and actionable insight from you, and really appreciate your your time here and your you know we think it's good. It's really valuable and gonna hopefully help a lot of people. Thanks again, and if we
Thank
have
you,
any
Nick.
questions, we'll direct people directly to you.
I appreciate it. Have a good one.
Sounds good. See ya.